Welcome to the Collaboratory Career Hub. My name is Carleen Sabusap. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an account manager and scientific recruiter, and I'm here today with Tom Cruz to talk about their work as an instructional designer and curriculum developer who's dedicated to neuroinclusion in and out of the workplace. They'll be talking about their experience with crafting learning and skills development for various industries, including public health, academia, and consumer marketing using the various content that they'll be developing with the Collaboratory Career Hub. I think their experience is really unique. As a lifelong neurodivergent learner, Tom has a really specific and rich background in creating inclusive learning experiences that cater to all abilities. So I'll go ahead and let Tom talk a little bit more about their background and what they're here to do with us today.
Thank you so much, Carleen. That was a wonderful introduction. Like many of my peers within this particular industry, I fell into instructional design through my special interests and strengths that I displayed throughout my experience as a marketer, media producer, and academic program manager. No matter what role I held, I inevitably became responsible for leading the development of soft and technical skills, designing and hosting workshops, training people in both individual contributor and leadership roles. Most importantly, working with subject matter experts to translate technical content into learning curricula that was designed for the layperson. Early in my career, specifically with academia learning content, that actually included college level STEM subject matter being translated for K through 12 audiences. So, as you mentioned, as someone with neurodivergent traits who struggled in traditional learning and professional environments that naturally cater to neurotypical people, I had to become my own subject matter expert to advocate for accessible accommodations or to train colleagues and managers in their inclusive workplace practices. And that was with varying degrees of success, especially because I was my main stakeholder. At this point in my career, I'm now in a position to help other people build themselves up through accessible approaches to learning and skills development, guide them on advocating for themselves, and help folks understand what they should expect of employers to ensure that neurodiverse candidates can pursue opportunities in truly neuro-inclusive workspaces. It's frankly a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of the Collaboratory project and start to create that change for others.
Thanks so much for the overview. I think your background is so unique in that you have a lot of people out there who are talking about inclusion and accessibility. And then you have all of the different great programs online working on really optimizing instructional design and meeting learners where they are. But I think it's very rare to have someone who's at the interface between those two realms. I think that's really essential considering how quickly different industries are evolving and taking into consideration the different needs that candidates have. It's not simply physical abilities or just how people interact with information. It's so much more than that. I was wondering if you could provide an overview of your experience as an instructional designer and your background in developing curriculum for diverse audiences.
So, as far as approaches when it comes to instructional design and curriculum development, I think back to what was effective for me as a neurodivergent learner, which was an emphasis on repetition as well as a multimodal delivery of content. The ability to engage with the content, considering ability. Are we delivering it in a way that is visual, textual? Are we providing basic accessibility considerations such as closed captioning, transcripts, and the ability to review content asynchronously? Some of these require smart solutions that I see being implemented in all kinds of ways, including usage of AI for providing transcripts to us that are synced to video. These are things that used to be extremely time intensive. You would have to get someone who specifically sat down with video all day to transcribe. But luckily, we're in a time where we can expect more from our learning experiences. With all these solutions that come our way, especially with the development of AI tools, what I see is a brighter future for especially accessible practices, whether that's based off of web content accessibility guidelines or simply being a bit more conscious of learning styles.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of organizations will say, I don't know how to do that, or we don't have the money to do that. And I think so much of your work and our ability to consult with different organizations is showing them it's as easy as using this AI program. These protocols exist. We're not expecting you to start from scratch. I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what kinds of strategies or methodologies you use to ensure that curriculum content is accessible and inclusive for individuals with disabilities specifically.
So I talked a little bit about this in my last response, but certainly ensuring that we are providing things like closed captioning if we're going to opt for video, if we're including images, ensuring that there is alt text. A lot of this can be built into instructional design and curriculum development workflows. Keeping these considerations in mind, ensuring that they are the standard should be on the minds of employers, trainers, or any sort of learning platform. But I'd also like to instill that as well in candidates and learners to know how to look for whether or not these considerations are being taken into account. And also to have some confidence and be able to ask for what you need. There is no one blanket accessibility consideration that works for everyone. Sometimes you have to be your own advocate and be able to speak up for what you need. You'd be surprised at how many people are willing to meet you where you are. The WCAG or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is a fantastic resource. Everything that you can imagine as far as user experience or media production, they have some kind of resource available for setting standards when it comes to accessibility. I would highly recommend whether you are someone who creates that content or someone who depends on content that fits within those guidelines. Certainly look it up and then you'll know not only how to create something that is more accessible or teach in a manner that's more accessible, but also ask for what you need.
Yeah, for sure. I think the point that you made in terms of making these different features the standard is really important. I feel like forcing people to ask for it is forcing them to identify themselves in a way that they might not be comfortable declaring to another organization, especially when interviewing them or assessing their abilities to do something. Could you talk a bit more about ways that you can incorporate real world scenarios and case studies into curriculum to help candidates apply their knowledge of accessibility and DEI advocacy during interviews?
I'm stuck on you having mentioned declaration or the circumstances that would lead up to a candidate having to speak up for themselves. The content that I have in mind for sharing with your learners in particular is looking at the dialogue between an employer and the candidate. From my own experience, I came up with having to become my own subject matter expert, my own advocate in order to ask for what I needed or in order to introduce people to these concepts that would ultimately lead to a more neuroinclusive workspace or even interpersonal relationships within the workplace. There's something to be said about teaching candidates to be able to self advocate because at this point, we can't expect every hiring manager, every supervisor to be the subject matter expert that we need, but also starting to build those expectations of workplaces as certain resources or skill sets begin to be a bit more democratized, so should we as neurodivergent professionals and candidates start to expect more from workplaces rather than having to ask all the time. The more that we can be proactive in ensuring that we have an accessible hiring or recruitment process in place, the less that we put some of what could be our best potential candidates in a position where they're having to disclose.
Yeah, I love that you took the time to share where your mind went in terms of having candidates advocate for themselves and the fact that there's a real cost benefit to it. My other question was about how we can incorporate real world scenarios and case studies to curriculum. Where are we able to find those examples and what's a way to integrate that information that will help candidates apply that knowledge in terms of accessibility and DEI advocacy during interviews?
There are organizations who might find advocates within on their own teams who are certainly outspoken about either topics of neurodiversity or being someone who has neurodivergent traits themselves. But at the same time, that's not the kind of labor that we want to immediately ask of people within our own organizations. So that's where I would call on doing some of our own research. One thing that we can gather, of course, is the user journey for someone who might be applying to our organization, which does not start with them hitting apply. It starts with the job description process. We might even argue the job creation process. Are you providing a job description that actually tells me what I'm going to be doing in this position? If you're using language such as, we want someone who's a team player, what does a team player look like in your organization? What behaviors are you looking for? How can you illustrate performance in a way that is measurable? These are all very helpful, especially for neurodivergent candidates to understand what's being asked of us. And that can trickle down into us mapping the rest of that journey so that we can be inclusive at every step of the process and not just by writing the job description. Thinking about the questions that a neurodivergent candidate would ask and preempting those. I think if we took the time to be a bit introspective about that, we can start to build some case studies out of things that we've learned to do every day. There are plenty of organizations that specifically help not only candidates, but also employers, organizations, and institutions as well. Top of mind would be the Job Accommodations Network. So that's JAN.org. They specifically work with candidates. I've worked with them in order to understand what accommodations we can ask for. And they even have a library of all kinds of disabilities or conditions. And they're willing to talk to you in any fashion that you prefer. They do offer the same thing for employers. So there are answers out there that cost nothing in order to start building a foundation for organizations who can begin to offer that on a more systemic level. Similarly, I would also point to Hire Autism. That's HIRE, autism.org, who works through the Organization for Autism Research. They not only have a job board, but they also work directly with candidates in order to help you better understand how you can go through the applicant or candidate process in a way that allows you to self-advocate and also find the right fit for you. Both of those offer options for organizations as well as candidates. And of course, there are other resources.
That was great. Those 2 resources sound incredible. Just another thing that I think most people will not be familiar with is that they're able to tap into those kinds of things. And I love that you mentioned job descriptions. I think those are really great strategies that organizations can use so that they make sure that they have the best shot at finding the best candidate for their role. Thank you so much, Tom, for everything that you've shared with us today. I'm super excited for our collaborations within the Collaboratory. I think we'll be able to help candidates to have the resources or tools that they need in order to be successful looking for positions or in terms of working with organizations overall. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to contributing to that work.